Jealousy is one of those emotions that doesn't make much noise on the outside, but eats you alive on the inside. It starts small, like a splinter you barely notice, but before long, it becomes a wound that throbs every time you see someone doing better, smiling brighter, or living freer than you. The Stoics understood this long before modern psychology gave it a name. They saw jealousy as a storm of the soul, one that clouds judgment and makes us prisoners of what we think others have. Imagine a man who spends every morning looking into his neighbor's yard, counting the other man's fruit instead of tending to his own tree. That's the perfect picture of what jealousy does to the human mind. Stoicism, at its heart, isn't about being emotionless or detached. It's about being awake. It teaches that peace of mind comes from clarity, seeing things as they are, not as your ego paints them. Seneca once said, "He who envies others admits his own inferiority." That wasn't a cold remark. It was an invitation to look inward. The Stoics believed the human mind can be trained like a muscle. They practiced turning their focus inward, learning to interpret feelings instead of drowning in them. Their idea wasn't to suppress jealousy, but to understand it, to see where it grows from and how it feeds off comparison, insecurity, and illusion. Now, when jealousy creeps in, it's not just about someone else having more. It's about us losing sight of who we are. The Stoics would say the real battle isn't with the person we envy, but with the story we tell ourselves about them. So the question becomes, how do we free ourselves from that story? How do we stop being the person staring into the neighbor's yard and finally start tending to our own? That's where the real work and the real peace begins. If this reflection struck a chord with you, don't let it fade with you. Don't let it fade the moment you scroll away. Share your thoughts. What part of jealousy do you wrestle with most? Drop it in the comments. Real insight grows in conversation. And if this kind of mindful reflection speaks to you, hit that like and subscribe. It's a small gesture, but it helps keep this space alive for more of these quiet, honest talks about the mind, the heart, and the things that move us from within. Number 1. Weakened self-confidence. Jealousy doesn't show up all at once. It sneaks in quietly, a glance, a thought, a moment of comparison. You see someone praised for what you've worked for, and suddenly your own achievements seem smaller. The Stoics would say that jealousy isn't about the other person at all. It's a reflection of a crack within yourself, a wound to confidence. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." If you constantly feed your mind comparisons, your confidence slowly takes on their color, faded, doubtful, and restless. A Stoic strength came not from arrogance, but from quiet certainty. They believed confidence is built by living in alignment with one's values, not by chasing applause. When a jealous thought appeared, they didn't fight it with denial. They replaced it with action. Epictetus advised his students to practice their philosophy daily, not talk about it. The Stoic didn't waste time counting another man's coins. He got up and earned his own. In that discipline, in doing what was his to do, confidence grew stronger, and jealousy had no soil left to take root. In everyday life, it's like the difference between two neighbors. One keeps staring at the other's garden, complaining about how green the grass looks next door. The other wakes up early, waters her own plants, and quietly lets her garden bloom. The first woman's jealousy drains her energy, while the second woman's confidence grows with every seed she tends. The Stoics would say that envy is a symptom of neglect, not of others, but of yourself. When you stop tending to your own garden, your self-worth dries out. The real Stoic lesson is that confidence isn't loud and it isn't handed to you. It's earned through integrity, through living in a way that you can respect yourself at the end of the day. The moment you start living by what's right for you, jealousy begins to fade on its own. It has nothing to feed on. Because a mind at peace with itself has no reason to measure its worth by anyone else's reflection. Number 2. Increased anxiety and stress. Jealousy doesn't just twist your thoughts, it hijacks your peace. The moment it creeps in, the body reacts. Your chest tightens, your stomach knots, and your mind starts running marathons that never end. The Stoics believed that jealousy creates a state of constant agitation because it pulls you away from presence. You stop living today and start obsessing over what someone else might have tomorrow. It's like trying to walk a straight path while constantly looking sideways. You stumble over your own feet. As Seneca wrote, "He who suffers before it is necessary, suffers more than is necessary." And jealousy does exactly that. It makes you suffer over things that aren't even happening. To a Stoic, anxiety wasn't caused by the world, but by our distorted interpretation of it. When you see someone doing better and assume it threatens your worth, your mind enters a loop of tension, the kind that never lets you rest. The Stoics practiced aphileia, simplicity of emotion, by stripping away unnecessary reactions. Instead of overthinking, they returned to calm observation. What is really happening here? Jealousy, in their view, was like mistaking a shadow for a monster. The fear feels real, but when you shine the light of reason, there's nothing there. Picture a man lying awake at night, scrolling through social media, comparing his quiet life to everyone else's highlight reel. His heart races, his chest feels heavy, his thoughts spiral, all over things that exist only on a screen. The Stoics would have recognized that man immediately. They called this the sickness of the soul, when emotions grow wild because the mind has forgotten its anchor. They taught that serenity comes not from ignoring emotions, but from calming them through understanding. Once you see jealousy for what it is, an emotional mirage, the body begins to unclench. Jealousy's greatest trick is convincing you that peace will come after you measure up. But the Stoics flipped that idea entirely. They believed peace has to come before. It's the foundation for seeing life clearly. When you learn to slow down your thoughts, breathe through your reactions, and observe without judgment, anxiety loses its grip. Jealousy can't thrive in a calm mind. Because in that stillness, that quiet space the Stoics spent their lives cultivating, there's no room left for comparison, only the steady rhythm of your own being. Number 3. Feelings of failure and dissatisfaction. Jealousy often disguises itself as ambition. You see someone achieving something you've dreamed about, and instead of feeling inspired, you feel a quiet sting, a whisper that says you're falling behind. The Stoics saw this as one of the most dangerous traps for the human spirit, the moment when envy turns inward and becomes self-blame. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "It is not that life is too short, but that we waste much of it. The jealous mind wastes itself comparing, always feeling like it's running late to its own life." That's where the sense of failure begins, not in what we lack, but in how we measure. A Stoic didn't judge his life by another man's timeline. For them, true success was about living in harmony with one's own nature. They believed that chasing another person's version of happiness leads only to exhaustion. Imagine a farmer who tries to grow grapes in the desert just because his neighbor's vineyard looks beautiful. He spends years fighting the soil, the weather, and himself, and when nothing grows, he calls it failure. The Stoics would gently say, it was never failure. It was simply planting the wrong seeds in the wrong ground. In modern terms, jealousy convinces you that your worth depends on outcomes, job titles, followers, attention, money. The Stoics flipped that completely. They trained themselves to find joy in progress, not perfection. Epictetus taught that satisfaction comes from effort aligned with purpose, not from applause. To feel fulfilled, they said, is to know that you're walking your own road, even if no one else notices. Jealousy ruins that path because it makes you walk while staring at someone else's map. The Stoic way back from dissatisfaction wasn't through denial, but through redirection. They turned comparison into curiosity. What can I learn from this person instead of resenting them? They turned failure into practice. What does this teach me about who I am and what I value? Slowly, what once felt like proof of failure became fuel for growth. And that's the quiet victory of Stoicism. It transforms jealousy from a wound into a window, letting light in where once there was only self-doubt. Number 4. Blaming others instead of oneself. When jealousy shows up, it rarely knocks politely. It bursts in, pointing fingers. She had help. He just got lucky. Life's unfair. That's the first move of jealousy, to protect our fragile pride by blaming the outside world. The Stoics, centuries ago, saw this reaction as the mind's clever way of dodging responsibility. It feels easier to say, they don't deserve it, than to quietly admit, I wish I had it too. But the moment we ship the blame outward, we hand away our peace. Seneca once wrote, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." The Stoics believed that when you keep blaming others, you never give yourself the chance to grow stronger through reflection. Imagine a man who constantly complains that his coworker gets all the recognition. He gossips, criticizes, and calls her manipulative. But deep down, what truly hurts him isn't her success, it's his feeling of being unseen. The Stoics would say, he's like a man shouting at his own shadow. Blaming her doesn't bring him closer to peace, it just deepens his bitterness. In their view, blame is like trying to clean a dirty mirror by yelling at the reflection. The dirt remains, not because the world is unfair, but because we refuse to wipe our own side first. One of the lesser-known Stoic practices was self-auditing, quietly reviewing one's own actions at the end of the day. Instead of pointing out who wronged them, Stoics asked, "What did I do well today? What could I do better?" They believed that true strength came from self-examination, not accusation. Marcus Aurelius did this nightly, writing notes to himself that were never meant for anyone else's eyes. It wasn't self-blame, it was self-honesty. That small shift turned frustration into progress, because once you stop blaming others, you can finally see what's actually within your reach to change. Jealousy feeds on blame, because blame keeps you from looking inward. The Stoics knew that freedom begins where excuses end. When you stop saying they have it easier and start asking, what can I learn from this, jealousy starts losing its grip. Blame chains you to the problem, but reflection, humble, honest reflection, opens the door out. And maybe that's the quietest kind of victory, realizing that peace doesn't come when the world changes, but when you stop making the world your excuse. Number 5. Decreased quality of social relationships. Jealousy has a quiet way of poisoning closeness. It doesn't shout, it seeps in. You start by admiring someone's success, and before you know it, every laugh, every compliment they get feels like a small sting. The Stoics saw this not as a flaw in others, but as a fracture within the self, a sign that we've lost our inner balance. Epictetus once said, "When you are offended at someone's success, turn inward and examine what part of you is untrained." Jealousy, in their eyes, was never really about another person. It was about the cracks in our own sense of worth. And once those cracks form, they begin to show up in our relationships, often in ways we don't even notice. Think of two friends who used to be inseparable. One gets a promotion. The other smiles, but feels a tightening in the chest. Suddenly, the jokes feel sharper, the compliments sound fake, and conversations grow shorter. The Stoics would say, What's dying there isn't just a friendship, it's trust. Jealousy makes genuine connection impossible because it turns every interaction into silent competition. When you see the people you love as rivals, affection slowly gives way to suspicion. You stop celebrating with them and start measuring yourself against them. And that's when love begins to wither. The Stoic philosophers practiced what we might call the discipline of goodwill. They trained themselves to feel joy for others' fortune, seeing it as proof that the world still holds beauty and justice. Seneca wrote, "No one can live happily who turns everything into a question of fortune." To envy someone's joy, the Stoics believed, was to misunderstand happiness itself, because happiness isn't a limited resource. If someone else shines, it doesn't dim your light. In fact, their success can be a mirror showing what's possible for you too, if only you drop the resentment and learn from it. When jealousy takes over, we don't just lose others, we lose the version of ourselves that's capable of real connection. Stoicism teaches that friendship and love require generosity of spirit, the ability to see another's joy as part of your own. The moment we start comparing, we stop connecting. But when we shift from, "Why not me?" to "Good for them," something subtle changes. We begin to feel lighter, freer, and closer again. Because deep down, peace isn't found in being ahead of others. It's found in walking beside them without envy weighing you down. Number 6. Increased sense of revenge and resentment. Jealousy doesn't always show up as sadness. Sometimes it wears the mask of anger. It starts as a quiet discomfort and slowly hardens into a craving for balance. If I can't have it, they shouldn't either. That's when jealousy crosses into resentment, a kind of slow-burning revenge that lives inside the mind. The Stoics warned about this transformation because they saw it as the point where reason begins to serve emotion rather than guide it. Seneca wrote, "Anger, if not restrained, is frequently more hurtful to us than the injury that provokes it." In jealousy, that anger doesn't come from real harm, it comes from imagined injustice. And yet, the pain feels just as real. Picture someone who watches a colleague succeed and feels a surge of bitterness. They might not lash out directly, but small acts of revenge creep in, withholding kindness, spreading subtle rumors, hoping, in secret, for the other person's fall. The Stoics believed that this state was a kind of self-poisoning. They often used the metaphor of a cup of venom. When you wish harm upon another, you're the one drinking it. Resentment doesn't punish its target, it just keeps you chained to them, long after the moment has passed. That's the true tragedy of jealousy. You become emotionally dependent on the downfall of someone else. The Stoic answer wasn't to deny anger, but to understand it. They saw emotions like resentment as signals of misplaced attention. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself to meet unkindness with understanding, not because others always deserved it, but because he refused to let another's behavior control his spirit. For the Stoics, dignity was the ultimate revenge, the refusal to be dragged down to the level of pettiness or spite. They taught that when you respond to jealousy with grace, you rob it of its power. You take back control of your emotional balance and your moral center. When jealousy grows into resentment, it convinces you that someone else must lose for you to feel whole. The Stoics turned that idea upside down. They believed that true strength lies in rising above competition, in building a mind that cannot be shaken by another's fortune. Revenge, they said, isn't justice. It's just another form of bondage. The moment you choose to let go, to wish no harm, you begin to free yourself from that invisible prison. Because in the end, nothing disarms jealousy more completely than indifference, not the cold kind, but the calm, grounded kind that comes from knowing your worth doesn't depend on anyone else's story. If you've stayed with me to the end, take a moment to notice what that says about you, that you care about understanding your emotions rather than being ruled by them. Jealousy, resentment, and revenge are all deeply human feelings. The Stoics never denied that. What they mastered was the art of not letting those feelings take the driver's seat. So, if something in these words resonated with you, don't rush to change overnight. Just start observing. Every time you feel that sting of envy, treat it as a teacher, not an enemy. That's where real strength begins, in quiet awareness, in the decision to stay kind even when your heart wants to fight back. And that choice, repeated often enough, is what turns ordinary minds into wise ones.